In late 2012, a small fishing boat vanished from the coast of southern Mexico and then reappeared more than a year later on a speck of land in the central Pacific, carrying a man who claimed to have drifted alone for 438 days. The figure who stepped ashore at Ibon Atoll in the Marshall Islands was gaunt, salt-crusted, and delirious, clutching the memory of waves and the weight of things he had done to survive. The bare facts read like a myth, a voyage that stretched across thousands of miles, a tiny craft turned oceanic coffin and cradle, a story that challenged the boundaries of endurance and the limits of belief. The man's name was José Salvador Alvarenga, a Salvadoran fisherman who had been working out of Mexico when a storm allegedly blew his boat far off course in November 2012. He and a younger companion, Ezequiel Cordoba, set out on what was meant to be a routine fishing trip and were soon adrift after the engine died and the seas took them. The initial days were the most ordinary part of an extraordinary sequence: rationing, trying to catch fish with fading gear, sleeping in a boat that became both shelter and tomb. As food ran out and the fabric of routine unraveled, survival strategies hardened into ritual. According to the account that would later be told to journalists and chronicled in the book 438 Days, Alvarenga survived by improvisation thin as thread. He caught fish with his bare hands, snared seabirds and turtles when luck and cunning permitted, drank rainwater collected in makeshift containers, and at times depended on the iron taste of turtle blood. When supplies dwindled, he scavenged debris that passed like small islands in the vast blue, and he tracked time by watching the moon. Those daily acts of resourcefulness, cleaning raw meat on a knife, fashioning hooks from shards, watching the horizon for any sign of a hull, were the scaffolding of his life, each small success a defiant answer to the ocean's indifferent appetite. The seascape, however, was not only a provider, it was a remorseless test. The younger crewmate, according to Alvarenga, fell sick early on and soon stopped eating. One version of the story says the companion died within weeks. Another places the collapse at a later point, and some elements of that account would later be contested. Still, the surviving man claimed he kept the corpse aboard for a time, speaking to it to stave off madness, then finally relinquishing it to the sea. Whether every detail is exact is a matter of debate. What does not sensibly admit debate is that the ocean refashions time and identity, and that in those months a man's calendar could shrink to the horizon and a handful of lunar cycles. When land finally blurred into view, it was a miracle that arrived like the end of a long hallucination. The island where he washed ashore, Tile Islet of Ibon Atoll, is remote, thin sand and palms and people whose lives move on a different tidal clock. Local residents found him naked and shouting, speaking Spanish in a place with few speakers. He was taken in, fed and tended. Authorities verified the broad outlines of his claim, and world headlines followed in the days after his rescue. Scientists and skeptics weighed in. Some called the story implausible, citing the nutritional and psychological improbabilities of more than a year at sea in a small boat, while others pointed to plausible biological explanations. Turtle meat and bird flesh supply vitamin C enough to avoid scurvy, certain survival techniques explained in historical cases. The rescue itself became another public event, a knot of wonder and suspicion that would not easily untangle. What followed was not merely recovery, it was a slow unspooling into the world that had kept turning while he drifted. After treatment in Majuro, Alvarenga returned to El Salvador, and recounting his ordeal became a public act, subject to interviews, medical scrutiny, and the glare of media appetite. For many, his story was heroic, evidence of human resilience, the sort of account that reconfigures what it means to endure. For others, inconsistencies in dates, routes, and memory raised red flags. How could a man survive so long without succumbing to scurvy or dying of infection? How had he navigated the currents? And why did early reports vary on crucial details? Authorities, journalists, and oceanographers debated and checked elements. The route was mapped by currents and wind patterns, the diet assessed by nutritionists, and the basic verification, the man existed and had been found on Ibon Atoll, stood uncontested. Yet debate lingered because extraordinary stories invite extraordinary skepticism. The narrative that moved most people was at its core simple. A human found a way to keep living when the world had been reduced to salt and sky. But the story's aftermath also illustrated a harsher truth about how modern culture consumes such narratives. When a book followed, an investigative account that worked to piece together dates, interviews, and supporting evidence, the story was represented for a global audience, edited and dramatized for impact. The book and accompanying coverage humanized Alvarenga while also opening him to accusations. A lawsuit later alleged cannibalism, and commentators questioned whether marketing and memory had conflated with fact. The man who returned to hug his daughter and sit in a living room became simultaneously a symbol of survival and a subject of suspicion. There is a lesson that lives between wonder and doubt. Survival narratives are not just about what people did, but about how communities interpret those actions after the fact. The scientific voice can explain whether vitamin C can be gleaned from turtles, whether dehydration and starvation can be outlasted under certain conditions. The human voice can describe the small rites that kept a person's mind from dissolving, talking to a companion's corpse to stave off loneliness, naming days by moon phases, singing to the horizon. The social voice weighs testimony, reads inconsistencies, and demands corroboration. Together, they create a composite truth that is messy and partial, one that acknowledges the limits of certainty while still recognizing the raw fact of someone returning from the edge. Perhaps the most penetrating image is not of the boat itself, but of the man who came back and had to live with the fragments of what he had done to survive. He left a sea of questions. How long did he keep his companion's body aboard? Did he ever break the promise he allegedly made? How did he track distance and time? Those questions matter because they are human questions, about dignity and desperation, about the decisions a mind will make when it is tasked only with staying alive. The legal and moral inquiries that followed, family lawsuits, press examinations, medical reports, did not simply adjudicate fact. They forced a conversation about what people owe to one another when the world narrows to hunger and the next breath. If there is a final, quieter moral, it is this: the sea rearranges everything it touches. Time becomes elastic, memory becomes porous, and the stories survivors tell are as much shapes of the past as they are tools for living in the present. José Salvador Alvarenga's journey, verifiable in its broad stroke by those who found him and by the maps of wind and current, remains lodged in a contested zone, part marvel, part mystery. Whether one reads it as an account of miraculous stubbornness or as a narrative that demands further proof, the image endures: a man, alone against an ocean that is indifferent and savage, keeping faith with life by doing what he must. The world watched and argued and then turned again, leaving the question of how much the ocean took and how much it left behind to linger like a line on the tide.